The small, gray house sat quietly at the end of the street, tucked between rows of tall oak trees. Its once welcoming porch, now weathered and cracked, seemed to mourn the life that once filled it. Inside, everything was still, except for the soft rustling of the wind brushing against the windows. The house, like its owner, had been left behind, abandoned in the wake of a sudden tragedy. Max, a scruffy terrier mix with a coat that had once been golden and full of life, lay curled up on the old rug by the front door. His eyes were soft, but there was a deep sadness in them that only an animal could understand. He had been waiting, patiently, for the sound of footsteps to return, footsteps that once carried his beloved owner, Claire, through the door every evening. But those footsteps never came again. Max had never understood what happened to Claire. All he knew was that one day, she didn't come home from the hospital. He'd spent days waiting by the door, pawing at it, whimpering when he heard cars pass by, hoping, praying that she would walk through that door. He didn't realize it at first, but the days turned into weeks, and Claire was never coming back. The house, once filled with laughter and the scent of Claire's cooking, had fallen silent. Max had tried to keep busy, chewing on his favorite toys, chasing after the occasional squirrel that darted across the yard, but none of it felt right. The food in his bowl no longer tasted the same, and the soft bed by the window, once a cozy haven, now felt lonely. On the days when the sun was high in the sky, Max would wander the empty house, his paws clicking softly on the wooden floors. He would stop by the windowsill where Claire had always sat to watch the world go by, his nose pressing against the glass as if he could will her to appear. But there was nothing, just the wind, the trees swaying gently, and the distant hum of life moving on outside. Max began to grow thin, his fur becoming matted and dull. His once playful energy faded into a quiet acceptance that felt unnatural for a dog so full of life. His heart longed for the comfort of Claire's gentle touch, for the warmth of her voice that had always reassured him when things were uncertain. And then, one day, a knock on the door. Max didn't know it yet, but this moment would change his life forever. The door creaked open, and there stood a woman, her face worn with concern. She stood there, taking in the sight of the house and the dog who had been waiting for so long. Her eyes softened as she crouched down to Max's level, offering him a kind smile. "Hey there, buddy," she said gently, her voice comforting yet unfamiliar. Max stared at her, unsure whether to approach. He wasn't used to strangers, not since Claire had passed. But something about the woman's voice seemed to remind him of the old days, the days when Claire would smile at him just like that. With tentative steps, Max padded over to her, sniffing her hand cautiously. The woman gently stroked his head, and for the first time in weeks, Max felt the comforting sensation of being cared for again. He wasn't sure what was happening, but he knew this wasn't like the others who had come and gone, leaving him behind. The woman's eyes glistened as she looked at him. She knew that Max's story was one of loss, of abandonment, but also of hope. She wasn't just there to say goodbye, she was there to help him find a new beginning. "I'm going to take care of you, Max," she whispered, as if the promise was already sealed. "You'll never be alone again." Max tilted his head, not fully understanding, but the warmth in her words melted the heavy sadness that had settled in his heart. It wasn't Claire, but maybe, just maybe, it could be something close to it. The woman rose slowly, and Max watched her with a mixture of curiosity and hope. She reached for the leash hanging by the door, and without another word, she clipped it to his collar. Max followed her out of the house, glancing back at the empty porch that had been his home for so long. It was hard to let go, but he knew that this was a new chapter, a new chance to feel loved again. As they walked down the path, the woman glanced down at him, smiling softly. "My name's Rachel," she said, her voice filled with warmth. "And you're coming with me. We've got a lot of people who are going to help you." Max's tail gave a tentative wag. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in what felt like forever, he allowed himself to feel a spark of hope. Rachel wasn't Claire, but she had something that made him feel like it might be okay again. The journey ahead would be long, and Max's heart still ached with memories of the life he had lost. But as he stepped forward, one paw at a time, into the unknown, he knew that this was the beginning of something new. And maybe, just maybe, he could find happiness once more. Max didn't know where he was going, but the gentle pull of the leash and the soothing presence of Rachel beside him made him feel a strange sense of comfort. The wind that had once seemed cold and distant now felt warmer, as though the world itself was welcoming him into something new. Rachel led him through the quiet streets, and Max followed, his head held high despite the confusion still swirling in his heart. They didn't walk far before they reached a bright, cheerful house, its yard lined with vibrant flowers and a white picket fence. The scent of freshly cut grass and the hum of a nearby lawnmower greeted Max's senses. He stopped for a moment, sniffing the air, his ears perked up. There was something different about this place. Something that felt alive. Rachel crouched down beside him again, her eyes full of warmth. "This is where you're going to stay," she said softly, her voice calm but full of determination. "There are some people here who are going to take care of you, Max. You're going to be safe." Max's tail twitched uncertainly. He had been in so many different places before, each time hoping it was the one where he would find peace. But the look in Rachel's eyes made him want to believe. She led him inside, and Max hesitated for only a second before following her through the open door. The interior of the house was cozy and bright, filled with soft colors and familiar scents of food and family. But it wasn't the house itself that caught Max's attention, it was the people who were there. A woman in her late 20s was sitting on the couch, a baby cradled in her arms. She smiled warmly when she saw Rachel and Max enter. "This is Sarah," Rachel introduced. "She's going to help take care of you." Max watched Sarah carefully as she stood, her arms gently holding the baby. Sarah knelt down to his level, offering her hand with a soft, inviting voice. "Hey there, Max. Welcome home." Max, still unsure, took a tentative step forward. The baby cooed in Sarah's arms, and something about the soft sound soothed him. Sarah didn't reach out to grab him, instead, she let him come to her when he was ready. Her calm demeanor made him feel safe, and after a moment of hesitation, Max stepped closer, sniffing her hand before nudging it gently with his nose. Sarah smiled, her eyes lighting up as she stroked his fur. "He's perfect," she said softly to Rachel, her voice full of admiration. "He's been through so much." Rachel nodded, her face serious but compassionate. "He has. But I think this is where he starts over. This is his new family." Max looked around at the other people in the room, his tail starting to sway slightly. A man in his 30s stood up from the kitchen table and walked over, his face kind and understanding. "Hey, buddy," he said, kneeling beside Sarah and extending his hand to Max. "I'm John. Welcome to the family." Max hesitated at first, then let out a quiet whine, his instincts telling him to trust, just a little. He sniffed John's hand, then slowly walked up to him, giving it a tentative lick. John chuckled softly, rubbing behind Max's ears. "That's a good boy," John said, his voice reassuring. "You've been through a lot, haven't you?" Max wagged his tail a little more vigorously, the tension in his body starting to ease. He didn't fully understand what was happening, but the kindness of these people made him want to believe. The room seemed brighter, and though there were still traces of sadness in his heart, it was no longer the overwhelming feeling it once had been. After a moment, Sarah stood up, moving to the kitchen with the baby. Rachel led Max toward a soft, plush dog bed that sat in the corner of the room, next to a large window where the afternoon sunlight streamed in. "This is your spot," Rachel said, her voice gentle but firm. "You're going to have everything you need here. A warm bed, plenty of food, and most importantly, love. We're going to take care of you, Max. You're part of the family now." Max looked at the bed, then at Rachel. There was something about her, the way she spoke to him as if she truly understood what he had been through. She wasn't trying to replace Claire, and she didn't expect him to forget his past. She simply wanted to help him heal, to give him a new chance at life. And for the first time in months, Max felt a small spark of hope flicker in his chest. He lowered himself into the bed, curling up into a ball. His eyes closed, the warmth of the room settling over him like a gentle blanket. The sounds of laughter and chatter from Sarah, John, and Rachel filled the air, and Max felt the faintest stirrings of something he hadn't felt in a long time, peace. The next few days were a blur of new experiences. Rachel took him on walks through the neighborhood, where Max met other dogs and sniffed around unfamiliar smells. Sarah would sit with him, brushing his coat gently while the baby giggled in the background. John would play fetch with him in the yard, throwing a tennis ball and watching Max chase it down with eager excitement. And every day, as the sun set and Max lay on his bed, he realized he was no longer alone. He wasn't in that cold, empty house anymore. He was here, in a place where he mattered, where he was wanted, and most importantly, loved. But even with the new family, Max's journey wasn't over. The scars of his past still lingered, and healing wasn't something that could happen overnight. There would be days when he remembered Claire, and the pain of losing her would return. But now, Max knew that he wasn't facing it alone. With Rachel, Sarah, John, and the baby by his side, he could move forward. And slowly, day by day, Max began to realize that maybe, just maybe, his new life could be better than he had ever imagined. As the weeks passed, Max's life began to settle into a comforting routine. He woke each morning to the smell of breakfast cooking in the kitchen, a gentle hand petting his head, and the soft sound of Rachel's voice telling him, "Good morning, Max." The early mornings, which had once been filled with anxiety and loneliness, now felt like a gentle promise of love and companionship. He was no longer just waiting for something that had passed, he was living, fully embraced by the present. The first time Max truly felt at home in his new life was a bright Saturday afternoon. Rachel had decided it was time for a little family outing. She put on her sneakers, grabbed a leash, and with a warm smile, called, "Max. Let's go to the park." Max's tail wagged instinctively at the word, park. He remembered the times when Claire would take him there, the grassy fields, the scent of other dogs, the sound of children laughing as they ran across the open space. Though the memories still tugged at his heart, they no longer brought the sharp pain they once did. Instead, they felt like distant echoes, reminders of a love that would always be there but didn't have to define him anymore. At the park, the air smelled fresh, filled with the earthy scent of trees and the sweet fragrance of flowers in bloom. Max trotted happily beside Rachel, feeling the grass beneath his paws, the warmth of the sun on his back. Rachel, walking at his side, smiled down at him. "You're doing so well, Max," she said softly. "Look at you, buddy. You're shining." Max looked up at her with trusting eyes, feeling a deep gratitude he could never fully express. He didn't know how to thank Rachel for the second chance she had given him. It wasn't just the food, the bed, or the walks that mattered. It was the simple things, the kindness, the patience, and the way Rachel always made him feel like he was part of something bigger than himself. At the park, they encountered other dogs, a fluffy golden retriever and a bouncy border collie. At first, Max felt a small twinge of hesitation. He remembered how, back in the old days, he would have happily run to meet any dog. But now, after all he had been through, there was a lingering wariness in him. The other dogs wagged their tails excitedly, eager to play, but Max held back, his ears slightly flattened. Rachel noticed, kneeling down beside him. "It's okay, Max. You don't have to play if you're not ready," she said gently. She rubbed behind his ears, her touch reassuring. "Take your time." For a moment, Max simply stood there, watching the other dogs run and jump, their carefree energy almost overwhelming. Then, slowly, something shifted. The more he observed, the more he realized that this was a safe place, a place where he didn't need to rush. He didn't have to prove anything to anyone. After a few minutes, Max took a tentative step forward, his tail giving a hesitant wag. The golden retriever noticed and bounded over, sniffing Max with curiosity. At first, Max tensed, unsure of how to respond, but then the golden retriever sat down beside him, wagging its tail in a friendly manner. Max sniffed the other dog's ear, his nervousness slowly melting away. It felt nice. The golden retriever, sensing his hesitation, nudged Max playfully with its nose, and suddenly, Max's guard began to lower. The playful nudge became a full-on invitation to play, a slow chase around the open field, a game of tug-of-war with a stray stick, and then moments of pure joy as Max and the golden retriever bounded through the grass together. Rachel watched from a distance, smiling as she saw Max take that first step toward healing. It was a small victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. And for Max, it was a moment of pure happiness, a moment where the weight of his past seemed to lift, if only for a little while. As the days turned into months, Max continued to grow more confident. He no longer flinched at loud noises or sudden movements, his fear of the world slowly melting away as he experienced the love and safety Rachel and her family provided. He had a place in their home, a place in their hearts. And, perhaps most importantly, he had his own place in the world once again. One afternoon, as Max lay curled up on the couch next to Rachel, Sarah and the baby playing nearby, Max felt a warmth in his chest that he hadn't experienced since Claire had been with him. It wasn't the same, and it never would be, but it was something he could accept. He had loved Claire, and he always would. But now, Max understood that love didn't have to be confined to the past. There was more love to be given and received, and his heart was big enough to hold it all. He was no longer just a dog waiting for a person. He was a dog with a family that had rescued him, but in return, had been saved by him as well. As Max lay there, feeling the gentle rhythm of Rachel's hand on his fur, he realized he had found something more precious than he ever thought possible. It wasn't just a new home or new people, it was the quiet, unconditional love that had brought him back to life. And in that moment, Max knew he had found where he truly belonged.